Checking and seeing we are live. All right. It has been a couple of Tuesday nights since we've done this, but we have been on the road. We've been busy. And I am so excited, y'all. We've got an awesome guest tonight. He's a longtime friend. He is a freaking legend, absolute legend of not only drag racing, but motorsports in general. And he is he's definitely a bad dude. And before I bring him on, you know, we're going to cover a lot of subjects because this guy knows them. He's just got so much information. I'm excited to get going here. And I did post, I think tonight, when we do our little giveaway, it is, where's the camera? There's the camera. It is a bobblehead. And I don't think it looks like me, to be honest. Donna did some Googling, and she thinks it looks like Kyle Busch. But at any rate, we got a cool box of Denso bobbleheads that came in to do the giveaway tonight. And holy crap, we're already rolling. So I'm going to introduce longtime friend, motorsports legend, all-around good guy, and one of my heroes. Everybody, I want y'all to welcome Mr. Bret Kepner. Bret, this is an absolute change because I am interviewing you and you are not interviewing me.
No, there's no question. This is a first. Yeah, no question about that.
I do want to thank you for coming on tonight. We've been trying to do this for a couple of weeks between my travel.
Now you can treat me like a first-round loser in modified.
Exactly. I don't know if I couldn't find you on Instagram, but I posted a video today that was very scratchy, and you could tell it was off of a VHS tape. But it was Darlington. It was my first IHRA national event win.
Sure.
And
it was a night. I remember that.
You were at the finish line down there, and I got to do an interview with you. And that weekend for me was not only gigantic because I won my first ever national event, but that was also the same weekend that Peter Lehman made his first trip to a race with me.
Really? I don't think I knew that Leyland was there at that time.
Yep, he was there with me, and that was obviously the start of my Top Fuel career.
Sure. Yeah.
And I could go on and on about that, but one of the things that was really cool that you did back then, there was an 800 number that you used to be the voice of, that I was one of the ones that would call in to find out who won the races.
Wait a minute. Let's be clear. It was definitely not an 800 number. It was a 900 number, buddy. That was money.
You're right. 900. You're right. You're right. But you were the voice of that. And so I win my first national event, and you called my sister Lee, and you were the first to tell her that you went into the whole spiel. You know, this is Bret Kepner, IHRA results, Darlington, you know, however you did all of that.
The reason that I did it was because it was a 900 number, and Lee, I did every class, qualifying, not just who was number one, the entire qualifying list for every class. It's press 1 for Top Fuel, press 6 for Superstock, that kind of thing. And then I'd do a complete recap of the race after the race was over, and you'd call, and I mean, it wasn't cheap. It was probably 75 cents a minute or something. I mean, people were spending 15, 20 minutes on these things. 15, 20 minutes and even more, you know, $15, $20 on these things. And Lee was one of them. And I knew that she spent a fortune just calling every time to see how you did. So I called her and did the voice. You know, this is Bret Kepner from the IHRA Team Talk Hotline with results from the IHRA Winter Nationals, blah, 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 blah. And I know she knew what was going on fairly early, but, you know, of course, I led right into Clay Milliken wins his first event. She went crazy. It was a really cool moment.
It was really, really cool for us, you know, something we've talked about a lot over the years. But without all of that going, I want to just hop right in. So where was your first ever go to the race event?
1970 NHRA Summer Nationals. Where was it?
God, I have no idea.
Well, where was the NHRA Summer Nationals always held?
Englishtown.
Right. And it wasn't at Englishtown.
No kidding.
The first NHRA Summer Nationals was in 1970 at York, Pennsylvania, at the York Airport, which was York US 30 Dragway. And I was 11 years old. Finally talked my parents into. You're getting into a messy background here that I don't think even you know, but I was raised in an Amish community in
Wow, I did
Pennsylvania.
not know
I very seldom bring it up, and not for any reason. It's just not something. It brings up far more questions than it's worth.
Are you
Anyway, I talked my parents into taking me to the race, and we got into an argument with the. Wasn't an argument. We were trying to convince the ticket taker that I was under 12, and I was. It was July 18th of 1970. My birthday is August 24th, so I was 5 weeks away from turning 12 because, of course, 12 and under was free. And I was a tall kid, so they didn't believe me, and we finally convinced them. Nobody had ID back then for kids or anything like that. Finally convinced them I got in for free. So that was my first race. I moved to Missouri in 1971, and at that point, I started going to racetracks all over the St. Louis area by what back then was a completely socially acceptable form of transportation, which was, for a 12-year-old, 13-year-old kid,
a bicycle.
no,
a horse?
no.
The subway. I mean, the bus. I don't know.
This is something you would never do in the 21st century.
Oh, ride in the back of a pickup truck?
Close. Hitchhiking.
Oh, yeah. You got to remember, I'm a country boy. We don't really have hitchhikers. We ride in the back.
Yeah, not enough vehicles go by for you to bother. That's true. But yeah, for us urban people, I guess, hitchhiking was a completely. I asked my dad, "Hey, take me to the races." He says, "Do what I used to do, hitchhike." So I used to hitchhike to different tracks, and after a period of time, the same racers would know where I was and pick me up each week. So that's how I started going to the race.
So,
Now, prior to the York deal, I was completely immersed in the culture. I was reading every racing magazine. All I did when I went to York was spout names and cities and everything else as each car came up to the line. So I was pretty ate up when I first went.
So what was your magazine of choice? Like, what did you wait on to come in the mail? Like, oh, I can't wait to get this month. What was the?
I can skip forward in time and give you the answer to that. By the time I was 14 or so, I knew what I wanted to do for a living, and that was write for the racing magazines. I had a couple of teachers who sparked an interest in writing for me and made me understand that I had at least a knack for it and understood English and things like that. Understood writing the language. But when I was 15, I would go to local races and I would write race reports and send them to different publications. I didn't expect to get hired. I just wanted them to know who I was. And the only place I wanted to work was Superstock Magazine. And in 1977, at the AHRA Grand American here in St. Louis, I met Jim Kelly, who was the editor of Superstock Magazine. He was at the time also editor of AHRA's Drag World. And I don't remember if I crawled up to him and introduced myself or whatever, but somehow we started talking. And he said, I told him my name. And he said, "You're the guy that sends me the stories all the time." And I said, "Yes, sir." And long story short, by the end of that race, I was working for Superstock Magazine, and he was sending me to the AHRA Nationals at San Antonio in 2 weeks.
And how old were you at this point?
I started working for Superstock when I was 17.
Wow.
I had a monthly column in Superstock when I was 18.
That's amazing. When we were talking yesterday, I knew we weren't that far apart in age, and we're not. And it kind of dawned on me that you had to start really early, but I did not realize it was 17 years old. That's crazy.
Actually, working in the sport, I was either announcing. I started announcing that same year, or writing. And don't get me wrong, I was skipping meals, but that's basically all I was doing for a living, and that's basically all I've ever done for a living. is something in racing.
So did you finish high school, or did you like, hey, I made it?
Interesting story there. I finished high school and I was going to go. I'd saved up my money to go to the University of Missouri at Columbia, which is a great journalism school, figuring I needed a degree to get to work for any of these magazines. Boy, was that a mistake. No, let me rephrase that. It was not only a mistake going to Mizzou, it was a mistake thinking I needed a degree.
Right.
I got to Mizzou and they slapped me with an out-of-staters tax. Because I had moved a couple of times since then. Our family moved a couple of times, and I had come back to St. Louis or come back to Missouri. So I found the University of Missouri in St. Louis, which offered the same curriculum, but didn't have living quarters on site, so you didn't get hit with a tax. I went for 1.5 semesters. I was in college when that meeting with Jim Kelly took place, and he hired me right then and there. And I thought, okay, I can keep going to school. I can say, no, thanks, buddy, and keep going to school to get the job that I was just offered, or take the job, which is exactly what I did.
That's amazing. That is amazing. So first trip for them was San Antonio. Is that what you said? At 17?
Correct. 1977 IHRA Nationals in San Antonio.
And tell me about that trip, because that had to be at 17 years old. I mean, you had been hitchhiking to go to the races, but now you're on a for real trip.
Correct. No parents. I had just started racing a 1966 Plymouth Barracuda in L stock automatic. So I drove it to San Antonio. I blew 3 tires going down there. You might be old enough to remember the great recall of Firestone steel belted 500 radials. They were known for you just be going down the highway, and that's exactly what happened on that trip. Just going down the highway, and all of a sudden, the 2 hoops of steel passed you on the highway. The tires didn't even deflate. I stopped 3 times and kept buying new tires. So I already lost a fortune going to this race. But I did, at that race, meet up with a couple of different teams with whom I ended up traveling with for several years. One was Tom Dumbbell. Yes, that's his real name. He was a top fuel racer from Oklahoma City. I would drive to Oklahoma City and ride with him and his crew chief, John Davison, to multiple events. It just killed all the expenses for me. And, I'd do crewman stuff,
Sure.
If the cylinders needed to be bored by hand, guess who was out there with the hand borer, that kind of thing. But I was able to make some money at this, and I did that for a while with a couple of different teams. Mark Halleck's top fuel dragster, Steve Picou and Tom Coulin's funny car, Bill Chappelle's funny car. Traveled with a lot of teams between 77 and 79 in that area.
Wow. So did you ever have the want to be like, I don't want to get into your bracket racing just yet, but at that age, your goal, you just said, was to write for Superstock, and you were doing that. But did you ever dream of driving one of these fuel cars or being a pro driver of any kind?
I guess if you had to get down to my impetus for doing this, it was just to be a part of it in some way. The racing part of it, I got this 273 Barracuda. It's a slow car. I had a 60s Barracuda. It doesn't mean it was a Hemi car. It was 273 two barrel. But it didn't take, I'm not a good mechanic. It didn't take a heck of a lot of work to make it halfway competitive on the NHRA record. Excuse me, on the AHRA record. It was nowhere near the NHRA record. And honestly, the reason that I started racing it, you're not going to get too much of a thrill with an 80-mile-an-hour car, but because I could. That's the beauty of drag racing. I don't have to go over to the local drag strip and watch everybody race. I can do it myself. And honestly, racing to me was just a way of learning more about racing.
Yep. So
that's why it wasn't the end of the world when I started traveling all the time and I didn't have any time to race anymore. In 1978, I did switch to bracket racing because I was getting my head kicked in class racing. I did switch to bracket racing, and I finished 7th in the world. I lost with 7 cars left at the AHRA Bracket World Finals representing St. Louis International Raceway. I think I finished 5th in track points that year. just racing when I was in town. And that was the last time I raced until about 84, I think it was, but we'll get into that later.
Yep. So you said you had already started announcing at this point. What was your first opportunity to announce, and kind of how did that just come about? Obviously, you got the voice for it. You always have, but you were a writer.
Remember, I'm a writer. You know, if you ask me, you know, what I really consider myself deep down inside to be as what I do for a living, I'm a writer. Guy named Roger Monroe, excuse me, was the announcer at St. Louis International Raceway. St. Louis International Raceway wasn't necessarily the track that I went to the most in this area. It's only 11 miles from where I live now. It was only about 13 miles from where I lived then. But there were a lot of other tracks in the area that I went to that had weekly pro stock races or weekly competition eliminator programs that were better than, at least I thought, than St. Louis. Also, this wasn't a problem at the time, but hitchhiking into East St. Louis on a Saturday night was a really bad thing to do in the 1970s. And I never looked at it that way. I really didn't. I just went to other tracks. So anyway, I did start racing at St. Louis International on a regular basis, mainly because they were open 3 days a week. And the announcer was a guy named Roger Monroe, who was a tremendous motorcycle racer. And he was a good announcer, too. And one night I had lost early or something, and I was up in the timing tower just hanging out with him. And I got my announcing start the same way every other announcer in this business got their start. He turned to me and said, "I got to take a leak. Here, take over for a little bit." And I did. And it occurred to me very quickly that, hey, this is just like writing, except I can't correct my mistakes, I guess. And Roger went to the bathroom, came out of the porta-john and said, "Oh, he's talking. Good. I can go visit some of my friends real quick." And he was gone for about an hour. And I announced for about an hour. And he came back up and said, "Thanks," and took the mic. And neither one of us ever thought about it again until a couple of weeks later, Roger got a job writing for Vance and Hines back in the earliest days of Vance and Hines, riding one of their pro stock Kawasaki's. And the track operator, Phil Trover, who ran the track with his brother, Jody Trover, came up to me when Roger left and said, "Hey, I need an announcer. You want the job? You announce." And I said, "Well, I've done it once." And he said, "Well, I'll give you $25 a night." Well, at the time, the bracket class that I raced in paid 50 to win and 25 runner up. And I thought, well, you know, I can count on one hand the number of times I left with either 50 or 20 that year. And this is a guaranteed runner up every week. So I took the job.
Heck yeah. So of all the years, all the announcing, if I had to put you on the spot, and I am, most memorable event you ever announced, what would it be?
Give me a break. I can tell you this right now, and it's only because I keep track of really stupid things involving numbers. I'm some kind of numbers freak, and I've never really figured out what it is I'm trying to prove. But as of my most recent event, I'm at 3,917 events.
Wow.
That's not that many. It's a big number. It's a big number, but it's not as much as a track operator who runs 3 times a week who's owned a track for 30 years. You know, he's seen a whole lot more than 3,900. But either way, yeah, give me a minute. I'll think about it. Go to something else.
All right. So television. You were writing, you're announcing. Where did your first television gig come about?
If you want to do this chronologically, we need to go back to the announcing because I didn't go from the announcer of St. Louis International Raceway to television. A couple of months after I started doing the St. Louis International stuff was the AHRA Grand American that they had every year. Grand American, for the kids out there, the American Hot Rod Association. NHRA, we have the Mellow Yellow or Camping World Series. So a Mellow Yellow or Camping World event would be an NHRA national event. In AHRA, we had the Grand American Series. So an AHRA Grand American was a national event for the AHRA. And they came to St. Louis every year. And they came to St. Louis that year. Well, John Lundberg, whom you're as much of a friend of as me. Today is John Lundberg's birthday. Happy birthday, John. Turned 83 today.
Wow.
John Lundberg was the announcer of the American Hot Rod Association at the time. And I was talking with him, asking questions and stuff like that, bugging him, basically. And he said, here, why don't you announce the national event here, gave me stock eliminator or something like that. So I did, and before the end of that race, he had talked to Jim Tice. Jim Tice had heard me because he said a couple of things, and Tice said, why don't you come to Dragway 42, I think was the next race. I could be wrong on that, for the Grand American schedule. And I said, well, actually, I'm going to be there anyway because I write for Superstock, remember? And he's like, oh, yeah, you're that kid that Kelly hired. He said, well, good. When you're at Dragway 42, we'll just have you announce. We'll have you work with John there. So I started announcing AHRA national events. That led to announcing UDRA national events, mainly because they also race in St. Louis. And that worked all the way up until 1983 when I started working NHRA national events. So, slight claim to fame, only person to ever work for anybody other than NHRA while you were working for NHRA. I did NHRA, AHRA, and UDRA all at the same time. Then in 1984, I quit the NHRA. You want to know why?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Because at the time I was doing this for a living. And NHRA has always worked under the premise that you can come work for us, but there's 15 people in line waiting for you to die. And therefore, they don't tend to pay. Well, in 1983 and 1984, I was under the impression, like most people, that the NHRA was the big enchilada. You start working for them and you've got it made and you just stick with them and you'll be set for life. I think Clay Milliken probably knows that that's not the case, but at the end of the 1984 season, I was on their standard deal, which was they paid for the rum and you got a bag lunch and maybe 20 or 30 bucks a day.
Wow.
Everybody got the same thing. Safety safari guys, ticket takers, announcers, didn't matter. And they sold out the Pomona World Finals. It was the first year, 1984, that the World Finals were at Pomona. And they sold out Pomona, wouldn't let any more people in. And at the end of the race, the head of the NHRA announcing staff, who's no longer with us, and I don't need to run his name through the mud or anything, turned to me and said, this is all I can afford to give you, and gave me like 10 extra bucks.
Wow.
And I thought to myself, this is a dead end. This ain't going anywhere. And I had been told by the NHRA that I was going to be, actually, it's one of the funnier things that's ever been said to me. I was told, hey, you could end up being our number one announcer. Now, this is, in the face of Evans and McClellan and everything else. I mean, I wasn't stupid. I wasn't going to leapfrog over these guys. But when they asked, how soon do you think that could happen? I was told possibly 10 or 12 years. Well,
at 20 or 30 bucks a day.
I was just going to say, surprisingly, I would probably like to eat in that 10 or 12 years. So, yeah, it just didn't work out. As soon as I quit the NHRA, which, of course, was the end of the 83 season, the very, very late 1984, season, very late 1984, I got a phone call. I had taken a job as editor of United Racer newspaper in Chicago. And I got a phone call, and secretary sent it to me, and I answered the phone, and the female voice at the other end said, is this Bret Kepner? And I said, yes. And she said, stand by for a call from Larry Carrier. Okay, click. Now remember, I had gone to several IHRA national events, but I had met Ted Jones and a couple of other people, but that was about it. And actually, the only time I went to IHRA races was back when I was traveling as a crew guy with those Top Fuel guys.
Yeah.
So anyway, click, buzz. Hello, Mr. Kepner. Yes, this is Larry Carrier. I understand that you're no longer with the NHRA. So that's true. And he says, I'd like to hire you for the IHRA season starting at Darlington 1985. And I said, oh, well, okay. He says, what's your rate? And I said, well, at the time, let's say, because I was announcing a lot of other places other than NHRA, and I was making okay money. So let's say it was $100 a day. I said, $100 a day in expenses. And he goes, okay, see you at Darlington. Click. And I went, wait, I meant $100 an hour. That's what I meant to say, So I screwed myself out of that deal from inexperience, but that's when I started working for IHRA, and I worked for IHRA from 1985 through 1999, I think. And
the year
team,
before I started Top Fuel.
Say again?
The year before I started Top Fuel. You left
No,
IHRA.
85.
No, you said you left IHRA in 99?
Yes, correct. The year before you started Top Fuel, correct. Yes.
Yep.
I was going to say 85. Weren't you like 13?
Fresh out of high school in 84.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
When did you guys celebrate your honeymoon at Myrtle? Wasn't that like 90?
85, actually.
Oh, it was 85. Okay. I apologize. I didn't think it was that old.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. I don't think Myrtle was even open. Myrtle Drag Strip, for those of you wondering what we're talking about, in Myrtle, Mississippi, US 78 Dragway.
Yes, sir.
Rare bit of trivia. Where did C&D spend their honeymoon?
Exactly. Bear Watts Dragway.
Anyway, you didn't race that weekend? You just went to watch?
Absolutely. We raced.
Oh, okay. That's what I thought. So IHRA had the ESPN deal. People forget this, that IHRA was with ESPN for what the heck was it? 83 to 97, I guess, is when NHRA got hooked up with them. So IHRA had the ESPN deal for 14 years before NHRA ever got IHRA. And all those 14 years, no matter what people tell you, NHRA was only available on television, with one or two exceptions, on the Opryland network, the Nashville network, or TNN, which of course was the national network. Other than that, all NHRA races were syndicated, which means that a local station would buy that show for an hour and they'd show it at whenever. So the Spring Nationals would air at 190 different times in 190 different cities. There used to be a page in National Dragster of all the air times for all the cities. It was just insane. So the IHRA had the ESPN deal for drag racing, and that was a huge thing in the industry at the time. In 1985, the guy who was working pit reporting for the IHRA television broadcast, Bob Jenkins and Dave Newber were the anchors. Newber and Jenkins were also their anchors for NASCAR stuff. The guy who was doing pit reporting got an offer to do Formula One. Or, excuse me, he thought he was going to get an offer to do Formula One. He didn't actually get it. So he quit in order to set himself up for this job offer that was coming. All of a sudden, they needed a pit reporter. At the Spring Nationals in 1985, the director of the ESPN show contacted the timing tower because they were feeding the PA feed into the truck so that they knew what was going on.
Right.
And they said, who's the guy that announces for you? And they said, oh, it's Bret Kepner. And they said, well, we'd like to talk to him. Long story short, they offered me the television gig, and I turned to Ted Jones. I said, what do you think? And he said, what do you got to lose? Take it. I said, okay. So I took it.
So let me stop you for just a moment, because you mentioned, excuse me, Ted Jones a couple times. At this point, what was Ted Jones to the IHRA at this point? You went to work for Larry Carrier, who started IHRA, and what was Ted Jones' position?
I got the call from Larry Carrier, who was the IHRA owner, and for all intents and purposes, the IHRA god. He ran everything with an iron fist. But Ted Jones was the acting president. He was the vice president, but he was the guy that made everything happen, while Larry Carrier literally sat on a throne and said, do this, do that. So Ted was the IHRA. And he did do everything. You know, I mean, he ran everything. He was the guy behind the TV deal. He was the guy behind the racing. He was the guy behind the Drag Review magazine. He was the guy behind everything. So, and Ted and I, you know, hit it off immediately when I started working for IHRA. Like I said, I'd met him once or twice prior to that, but we didn't have any serious relationship. Fast forward to present day, I consider Ted a second father. I really do.
Yep.
I mean, he's been more than just a friend. He's been pretty much everything to me. So I started doing.
You look at Ted and you say, what do you think? So does this mean this is the end of IHRA and you're going to work for ESPN?
No. Good question, though, because yes, I had a serious problem. I don't think I've ever brought this up in public, but I had a serious problem when I started working for ESPN. And I was working for ESPN, and that was extremely rare. It's unheard of now. And when I say that, when you see people on television, other than a couple of guys on SportsCenter, nobody works for ESPN. Everybody is an independent contractor. But at the time, and that's the same for Fox Sports or any other sports network. But at the time, there was only one sports network, and a handful of people worked for it. Ted worked out a deal where I would still announce IHRA races on Friday and Saturday, and then I'd go do TV on Sunday. So I was collecting checks from Ted and from ESPN. The ESPN check was the bigger check, and I found out very quickly that ESPN is an acronym for extremely slow-paying network. When I say extremely slow, I'm talking 90 days.
Oh, wow.
And I could barely make ends meet, especially considering I was making okay money. It wasn't fantastic money, but it was certainly the most money I'd ever made.
Right.
And Ted worked out a deal for me. Like I said, I'm not even sure I should say this publicly, but Ted went ahead and cut me a check for the ESPN rate, and then he billed ESPN in my name and got the money.
Now that's a friend there, brother.
That's a friend. Now, between you and me, you and I know how most friends would work. But do I care if Ted tacked $200 or $300 on there? Hell no, I don't care if Ted tacked $200 or $300 on there, because I was eating, and that's all that mattered. So I started working for ESPN. I worked with ESPN all those years. I did not do much, very, very little other television stuff in that period. And the reason for that was because ESPN didn't care how good you were. And by the way, I eventually moved to become an independent contractor. About 1990, the whole industry changed, and they hired a couple of guys full time to do SportsCenter, and everybody else was just hired on a freelance basis. It cost us all our insurance and stuff like that, but who cares? Remember, I'm only doing this to be involved. So as long as I got to go to the races, I didn't give a damn.
Yep.
The only reason that I was with ESPN for that long was because ESPN really hated it if you went and worked for somebody else. If you worked for ESPN and you decided to go, I'll go do this ABC show just for kicks. That was the end of Steve Evans' career with ESPN.
Really?
Yeah, that was why Steve Evans disappeared from the ESPN shows, and he only barely got back on them just before he passed away. But yeah, it had nothing to do with my tremendous good looks or my fantastic personality and my incredible knowledge of drag racing. They loved me because I was loyal. That was it.
Wow.
And please don't tear me up on social media, those of you watching. I was being sarcastic about the other three things.
Pretty good point.
I'm going to tell you, I'm going to stop you for just a moment. We have
so far you guys haven't even been on the show, so please stop me.
We have massive numbers right now watching this, which is so much fun, and I truly enjoying this, and we've got questions. So kind of how we do this, Donna will hand me over questions that are really good. And one of the questions,
people are giving you questions, viewers.
Yes. Viewers are giving questions. So
Yeah, he's going to have to go back.
yeah, you're not going to believe some of all the stuff that's being put on here. Like one of the comments that I saw go by was you favor Ron Jeremy. I thought that was a compliment.
It is now.
but
30 years ago, it's very true. 30 years, well, you know this. Donna probably does too. At 30 years ago, I looked apparently an awful lot like Tom Selleck.
Yep,
And,
absolutely.
I will state publicly, for the record, there was absolutely no downside in the 1980s to looking an awful lot like Tom Selleck. Nowadays with Ron Jeremy, I guess it's just kind of a glorious past type of thing, because there's no real advantage to looking like Ron Jeremy. So go ahead.
So I do want to get back to where we're at with ESPN, that sort of thing. But this was one of the questions, and the question was, what is your craziest story about being around Al Tucci? I don't know what that question means, but okay, we'll just keep rolling then.
Okay, here's one from Brian Loans.
Brian Loans is asking a question. Go ahead, Donna.
Can you please tell us about the quickest way to get into a Mercury Sable when you forget your keys?
The quickest way to get in a Mercury Sable when you forget your keys.
Bear in mind, you said you wanted to get into the bracket racing stuff later. So for the people that don't know, I guess this is going to be disjointed, but I always buy the rental car insurance. I always have. And all the stories that people have heard about the way I treat rental cars is true, because I always buy the insurance. But yes, if you lock yourself out of your car, now remember, the car is running. You have, it's a very hot day. You've got the air conditioner on full, so that's why you left the car idling. But when you closed the doors, it locked itself. A brand new 20-pound sledgehammer, courtesy of Josh Peterson at Rockingham International Dragway, goes right through the back window.
Oh, Lord.
But because I still had to drive the car back to Charlotte, I wasn't going to knock out the side window. You do the right one. But yes, Josh said, I went to Josh at the tower and I said, you got a sledgehammer? Because I didn't want to use a small hammer. I wanted something that was really going to blow this window right out of it. And he said, yeah, he just bought two of them. I got a 10-pound and a 20-pound. I said, a 20-pound. I said, give me the 20-pound. And that is on video. We shot that for ESPN, and it was a piece called, I was making a big deal out of the, whatever year it was, 1995 Ford Taurus keyless entry system.
Oh, Lord.
I talked all about the keyless entry system, and then I pulled the sledgehammer out and blew the window.
Oh, Lord. Yeah, I know the rental car stories can go, but I want to back up.
Okay.
So you're doing the ESPN. You left IHRA at some point, and you've continued to work with Ted Jones.
I'll be more than happy to tell you when I left IHRA. It was 1999 when Bill Bader basically railroaded me right out of the association. Now, he did that with a lot of people, so I don't necessarily take that. Well, I guess I have to take it personally, but I didn't take it as offensively if I had been singled out. Yes, I left IHRA in 1999, and when I did not end my relationship with ESPN. The interesting part of it was Bill Bader lost the IHRA deal the ESPN deal for IHRA, and ESPN jumped to NHRA. So I went right back to NHRA. I did a couple of other things for 2 or 3 years, but in 2001, I started doing the NHRA Pro Modified shows, which started on the old Inside Drag Racing show on ESPN, which was a weekly show, all the way until they had their own on ESPN. Now, of course, that ended when NHRA went to Fox. I finished out I worked the NHRA Pro Modified TV shows from 2001 to 2017. The last couple of those years were Fox, and I think there was somebody else in there too, but I don't remember. Brian would know. So I continued my television relationship with ESPN for quite a while. So in total, I worked for for ESPN from 1985 until it was 24 years, whatever that ends up being. 2009.
Man, you're asking a guy that should know math, and I quit bracket racing long ago now.
And I'm starting to make no sense anymore either. So yes, I worked for ESPN for 24 years.
Wow. And you continued writing as well, correct? For Superstock
I'm
Records?
always writing. It's the only thing I do now is I still write. Yeah.
Yep. So I want to go ahead and just I did a little bit of cheating, and I might have texted and asked to get some questions to ask you. And one of those was to ask you about Ricky Smith interviewing himself about his first car.
Did you talk to Ted? We were just talking about this the other day with me and Ted.
I did not talk to Ted. I'm going to save my sources. You know,
Okay. I understand that. And anonymity is a good thing. Yes, I used to do Ricky Smith. I used to do an impersonation of Ricky Smith. I still do. And it's totally subjective as to whether or not you think it's good or not. But it started, the whole Ricky Smith thing started. I used to walk up to him and go, "Hi, Ricky, how you doing now, son? Good to hear from you, buddy. Ford Motorcraft Thunderbird, been running pretty good." Now, do you think that sounded like him?
Maybe just a little bit, maybe.
All right.
I can buy it.
Ricky thinks it sounds an awful lot like him, as do several other people. So this whole mess started beyond being just a joke that I would bring up, when I would walk up and say hi to him. At an April 1987 match race at Norwalk between Ricky Smith's Ford Motorcraft Thunderbird Pro Stocker and Bill Coolman's black and white Coolman Chassis Company Camaro that had just broken 200 miles per hour at Darlington in March. We had a UDRA national event at Muncie on Sunday, and I picked up this match race on Saturday night at Norwalk, which is how you did that. You'd pick up one event for the week, and then you just pick up satellite events around that and make it a 4-event week. That's how you come up with 3,900 events, is when you work 4 and 5 events a week, you can do that. Anyway, got to the track. Coolman was there and was just hanging around, and Ricky wasn't there yet. Well, it turns out like a 7 o'clock start, Ricky pulls into the pits at like 5. And I went up to him. I said, little late, Ricky. And he says, "You're not going to, well, I'll do Ricky." I said, "You're a little late, Ricky." And he goes, "Yeah." He says, "I got to change the motor in this damn thing. I blew a motor out of this car at Eastside last night. I only got one motor in the trailer. I got to put it in the car before I can run in here." So I said, "Okay, let me know if everything goes well." Did you understand any of that?
That was actually very good. That was really good.
And I have to ask, because if you can't tell what he's saying, which is kind of the way he is in real life, you're going to be at a loss. So I went up in the tower. Let's say it's now 6:30, and I called Bill Coolman up to the tower, and we did a pre-race interview. You know how I do them. I used to do them with you.
Yeah.
Just build up the race and talk to the superstar, and Coolman, of course, more than happy. Of course, Coolman, was still pretty blinded by the light, a month after the 200-mile-an-hour run, but he was eating up being the star. Well, I asked somebody to check down in the pits if Ricky was still working on the motor, and they said, yeah, he just got the motor in. So Ricky doesn't even like to do interviews most of the time anyway, let alone, interrupt him in the middle of a motor swap. So I realized I wasn't going to be able to talk to Ricky, and I just talked to Bill, and Bill was doing a little smack talking, yeah, I'm going to do my best to beat that Ford and blah, 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 blah. So I thought, I don't actually need Ricky in the tower. So I literally am standing in the tower holding the microphone, and I said, "Ladies and gentlemen, up here in the timing tower with me is the legend Ricky Smith, many-time IHRA Pro Stock National Event winner, whose Ford Motorcraft Thunderbird at Darlington just a couple of weeks ago actually went quicker in elapsed time than Bill Coolman did when he ran 200 miles an hour," which was true. Ricky, how quick's the car going to go tonight? I would never say anything that stupid, but it was, Ricky, how do you feel about things going on tonight? Well, Bret, I got to tell you, Ford Motorcraft Thunderbird was running pretty damn good at Darlington. And I think if we get the air we got here tonight and the track is halfway decent, I don't think that nitrous Chevy is going to have anything for Ricky's Miss Ford Motorcraft Thunderbird. Blah, 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 blah. So
that is so good.
I did the whole interview with Ricky Smith, but I didn't jack around. I did it exactly the way Ricky would do it. I mentioned all his sponsors, which of course I knew. I said the stuff that I knew he would say. It was just a really good Ricky Smith interview. I just made a really good Ricky Smith interview. I got to tell all the Ford fans out there, that's the only reason I'm here is beat this nitrous Chevrolet. They said this thing is 200 miles an hour. I don't think it's going to go 200. And I don't think it matters. So the only thing I did, and this somehow has become legend, was I asked Ricky to talk about his first car. Now, even I'm falling for this. I said, as Ricky Smith, about my first car. I said, Ricky, what's your first car? And he says, oh, you're not going to believe it, Bret. Back when I was 16 years old, I got my first car, and I loved that car. It was the greatest car I'd ever seen. It was a 1965 Rambler Marlin. It's a Rambler Marlin, for those of you who don't even know what a Rambler Marlin is. It was a fastback, pseudo high-performance Rambler in 1965. It's my personally, it's my favorite car, but it's a piece of garbage as far as everybody knows. And, I had that Rambler Marlin. I used to race that car at East Bend and all these other tracks. And, boy, I had a wonderful time with that car. And, here I am driving these Fords. And, boy, there's nothing wrong with these Fords. My Rambler Marlin, that was my dream car. I still love that car to this day. And then I just went into something else and talked about another sponsor. Okay, so at Norwalk, the old timing tower at Norwalk, which is a little timing tower, you had to come up through the floor to get to the announcing deck. It had literally a trap door, and you climbed this ladder and came up through the floor to the announcing. So I say goodbye to Ricky Smith, who's not in the tower, and I go back to announcing whatever I was announcing. And a little bit later, his head pops up through the hole in the floor, and I look behind me, and it's Ricky Smith. And I thought, oh boy, he's either going to be mad or he's going to be okay. And he looks up at me and goes, thanks for the interview. I got to tell you, it wasn't a damn Rambler Marlin. It was a goddamn 66 Nova.
Man.
So at that point, I knew I had done a good job, and I also knew he listened to the whole thing. So there's 5 minutes you didn't want to waste.
No,
Next.
that was awesome. But what I want to know is who won the match race between Coleman and
Coolman did, yeah.
He did. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you've announced more than just drag racing, which I could listen to your drag racing stories all night, but you even did some monster trucks at one point, right?
I did monster trucks from 1981 until 1997. But
So,
my monster truck career only involved announcing from January 1st to March 1st. Now, in that period, I could do 3 events a week, every week. So I did a lot of events, but it didn't eat in drag racing at all. As a matter of fact, because I was with the IHRA for most of that time, I made sure that I was at Darlington, which was in March every year, usually the week after Gainesville. So I didn't work any monster truck stuff during any other part of the year except that period. Now, I ended up doing monster truck TV stuff, which was also done, the majority of it was done in that same period. But then in 1990, ESPN put me on the Monster Truck Challenge Series show, which was on every day, 5 days a week at 4 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Eastern. And we did 250 shows a year.
that's a lot.
We'll let you in on something. I don't think that your audience is most of the monster truck fans that used to watch that show. So I don't want to break the hearts of the monster truck people out there. They used to fly me once every 3 weeks to Los Angeles, and we would voice like 15, 20 shows. These were half-hour shows, which means I only had to actually voice 20 minutes of them.
Yep.
24 minutes. But either way, It was a grind. And between you and me, I love monster truck racing. I was actually much more into the kind of indoor drag racing that we did with first mud vehicles and then sand drag racing vehicles. But it was turning into a grind. And a miraculous new product came out in 1990, I guess 1990, late 1990, called digital audio tape, DAT. And it was just a little remote unit, probably no bigger than a laptop now, that allowed you to do dubbing and voiceovers outside of the studio. And I told him, I said, hey, if you just if you just buy a digital audio tape machine and send it to me, you don't need to fly me to Los Angeles to do these things anymore. I can just use the master footage with time code, and you can match up the time code as I'm doing the voiceover. It's not a big deal. And they agreed. Now, first they sent a producer to my house to watch me do this. But after a couple of times of that, it was like, I don't need this guy here. So the end of this story is, of 250 shows a year that we did for 2 years, the majority of those shows, I did the voiceover in my underwear, smoking a cigarette in my living room.
Well, you went to a few events, and some of my sources tell me that you may have showed up at an event about a week early. Is that true?
God, who in the hell did you talk to? God.
This is why I'm keeping my sources secret.
God.
Did you actually show up to an event about a week early?
Don't ask me who was the announcer at the very first event at Memphis International Motorsports Park. No, don't ask me that. Do you remember that? What was the very first event ever held at Memphis International Motorsports Park?
It was actually a testing tune when the track opened, and it was Michael. No.
Big X. The very first event ever held at Memphis International Motorsports Park was a monster truck show in the Oval, and I announced it.
No kidding.
They had not run on the drag strip.
I'm totally zoned in on drag racing because I know they did like an open testing tune thing, and I think Michael Upchurch actually was the announcer. I might be wrong on that.
No, I think you're right. I think it was Mike.
But I did not realize that they did a monster truck. That was the first event they held at that facility. No kidding.
The first thing that ever happened to that track. In fact, the oval track they were worried that the asphalt was still a little too soft. Yeah, that's the first thing they did.
So that's fun.
Take it back. Was the oval track dirt to start with? Now that I think about it, I think it was dirt. Yeah, it was. Okay. Well, anyway, to answer your question, yes, after 10 years of doing the indoor stuff during the winter, I had a pretty regular circuit that I did, and one of them was Pittsburgh. And it was we had 5 or 6 announcers because the U.S. Hot Rod Association, the monster truck stuff, had up to 10 events going on per weekend, 10 different facilities. And I could go to the King Dome in front of 50,000 people or the Silver Dome in front of 30,000 people or whatever. But I didn't care about the ego stuff. I wanted the 3-nighters at Johnstown, Pennsylvania, where you worked in front of 2,500 people, but you were there for 3 nights. So, it was more money. So Pittsburgh was a 3-nighter at the Pittsburgh Civic Arena, which was where the Flyers used to play. And I flew into Pittsburgh one year, do a normal deal. And usually when I got into town, I would go over to the building, check into the motel first, and then go over to the building and talk to the racers who were already there. So I walked over to the building and walked in, and there was a boxing arena with a whole bunch of chairs on the floor. And I thought, that's kind of weird. And then I realized nobody was I didn't see any dirt equipment or anything. A lot of times, there was a basketball game or something, and then they would thrash to build the track for the Friday night show as soon as the basketball game was over on Thursday night. But I didn't see any equipment. And the more I looked around, the more I thought, this just doesn't feel right. So I finally went up to a security guard and I said, hey, is there a monster truck show here this weekend? And he says, no, that's next weekend. So I immediately called the event director, who, once he stopped laughing, realized that he had to find somebody to cover for me at the place that I was supposed to be. And what had happened is, I had tickets at home laid out, and I grabbed the wrong ticket, and I said, okay, I'm going to Pittsburgh. And I went to the airport and got on the plane and flew to Pittsburgh. When I got off the phone with the event director, I called TWA and said, hey, you're not going to believe this, but I screwed up. I need to fix this. And they said, ain't no fixing this. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, you got on the plane on the wrong day, and we can't refund that ticket. And I said, wait a minute. Your people let me get on the plane with the wrong ticket. Theoretically, the ticket shouldn't even have got me on the plane. Oh, sorry, that's not our problem. So I had to buy a round trip ticket from Pittsburgh back to St. Louis, back to Pittsburgh to come back the following week. So I lost the money that I was supposed to make that weekend, plus the airfare. It was a disaster.
Oh, man. That is crazy.
Really, man, let me think if I can come up with any really embarrassing stuff that I know that you don't know. Go ahead.
So we are blowing through our hour. There is no way I'm going to get to everything, but what I do want to get to,
maybe we should have a part two.
We're going to have a part two of this. We've got so much, but I do want to touch on your racetrack search. There may be some people watching that have no idea of this 30-some year long journey you have been on. If you could just kind of give us a brief rundown, and how did that start?
In all seriousness, I can make it brief. I apologize for being long-winded tonight. That was
this has been awesome. This has been so fun.
I had stuff I wanted to ask you, so we do need to have a second part. The Track Search Project began in 1997. I got together with a couple of guys from the internet, one of whom I knew, two of whom I'd never met in my life. John Paulette is the guy that I knew out of Virginia. You remember the Inside Motorsports newspaper?
Absolutely.
Yeah, John Paulette was he was partners with Scott Sparrow in that publication. And the other two are Tom Postuma and Ralph Ryder out of Vancouver, British Columbia. In the 1997 era of the internet, a lot of things happened, including the United States government archiving satellite imagery from the earliest days of satellite imagery to go with maps. In other words, you could look at, Google Earth now is what we refer to it as, which was a huge deal. And I came up with an idea to locate, confirm, then locate, then chronicle every drag strip ever built. At the time, there was a guy who used to write an annual book called the National Speedway Directory. His name was Alan Brown. And he used to cover drag strips, although he wasn't necessarily into them that much, in each year's National Speedway Directory. And he wrote a hardcover book, The History of America's Speedways, in 1993, I think, in which he had a list of 660 drag strips. And I knew that there was more than that because I knew that there were a couple that he doesn't have, or that he didn't have. And keep in mind, I will always be amazed at Alan Brown because he did that list without the internet.
Right.
Pretty astonishing stuff. Well, again, because all of a sudden we have the internet, and in the last 27 years, the amount of information we have is simply inconceivable. The four of us have worked on this project. Each guy has a different job description. Ralph Ryder is the image archivist. John keeps track of administrative stuff, and Tom and I are basically the detectives. That project has now ended up at this point, literally as of tonight, it's 1,113,000 words in the actual text document for it. That doesn't include photos or captions or videos or anything else. It's just the basic information for all the tracks that we found. It's 1,100,000 words. It's 3,800 pages, Arial 14 type. So
Wow.
that's not a boast. That's almost embarrassing. It's become beyond heroin. I mean, it's literally what I do for a living anymore. As far as actual numbers, I usually don't make this public, but because you're Claw Milliken, and Donna, I will tell you that right now we're at about 4,400 tracks.
Wow. How many of those have you actually stood on?
I have actually been to 343 drag strips.
Wow.
And that's a big deal. Brian Loans has jumped into the world of drag strips as heroin. He's way up in his second 100. He's probably at about 160 or 170 tracks. Kevin McKenna is way up there. I'm not going to crown myself king because every time you do that, you get knocked down 4 notches. But I do not know of anybody else that's over 300. I've personally sat down and done Don Garlits, and I've done Birthday Boy John Lundberg, and a bunch of other people who've been to a lot of tracks, and very few of them have gotten over about 220. Wow. Garlits you would expect would have been at just 300 or 400 tracks, but in fact, Don Garlits would go to a track, and if he liked it and the promoter was paying his rate, he would just go back the next year.
Right. So
Don didn't really go to that many new tracks. He was a regular at a lot of tracks. Yes, I've been to 343 tracks, and the 4,000 drag strips or 4,400 drag strips in the world that we've chronicled now. It's an amazing. I love it. Don't get me wrong. It's just an amazing way to spend your time is finding these tracks and confirming them. It's a tremendous amount of detective work, but that's what I do.
Well, Bret, Donna has been over here typing names in, and tonight we're giving away a little me, a little bobblehead me, and I'm with her. It does not really look like me. I think it looks like Kyle Busch.
It does look like Kyle Busch.
It looks like Kyle Busch.
I actually saw it earlier today, and it looks to me like the driver of the first Top Fuel car with 5 parachutes.
And who would that be? I don't know.
I'm saying the guy's neck is like 4 foot long.
Oh yeah. That's for sure. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pick the old laptop up. Donna's been putting these names in a random name generator, and we're going to see
a random name generator. I can't wait for this.
Yeah, seriously, she's been doing that names, right? Yep, Randy Davis. So Randy Davis, you have won a mini me that has a really long neck that looks like it's a Top Fuel car. So send me or Jolie Milliken, as she's known on Facebook, your address, and we will get this sent out to you. Golly,
we got to do a part 2 next week.
Well, can you do a part 2? Can we do a part 2?
Absolutely.
Because
people are like that.
There is so many questions, and there's so many people names that I'm seeing scrolling by on these comments of people that you've interviewed that it was like a huge thing to them. I just saw Danny Waters Jr. You remember actually the little video that I posted on Instagram.
I'm so old I remember Danny Waters Sr.
Yeah. So I mean, there's so many. We got to do this again. People in this outfit.
I'm so glad that you enjoyed it, because the one thing everybody that said anything kind about me needs to understand is if I interviewed you at the top end of Blowhole Dragway in 1989, it was as big of a deal for me as it was for you. I don't know how quite to say it. There's only a few people on the planet that would even understand it, Brian Loans being one of them. We are so thrilled to just be a part of this, that to watch somebody else win or watch somebody else thrash in the pits or anybody else in this business is just a thrill to be there to see it. So when you make the turnoff, I wasn't just standing there waiting to go home. I was just as thrilled for Clay Millican as I was for Cleo Chandler. Cleo Chandler,
Yeah.
probably the greatest top end interview I ever did in my life. God, I can't tell you how important that kind of stuff is to me. It's literally made a life worth living.
Well, I tell you what, I have been enjoyed all the time we've spent together, but we're going to do this again, and we're going to have to end it because, for one, I got to go pick my kid up in about 5 minutes. And for two, this is like my third bottle of water while we've been here, so I got to go.
I understand that. I thank you so much for having me. I will look forward to it next week. We have to talk about Clay Millican's stop at the Bret Kepner Drag Racing School, and what was the other thing you want? Oh, I know what else you wanted to talk about, and I know that you'll get to it next time. Okay.
Yeah, I want to talk about Mr. Dirt. I got a whole list of things. I mean, we barely have scratched the surface, and we will do this again.
What question did you ask me at the beginning of the show? And I said, let's talk about it later. What was the question?
I'm looking at Donna. I've had a lot of tire shake in my life. I don't even remember.
No, you asked me like, what was the most outrageous or biggest thing? It was something that I really had to think about. Oh, event, wasn't it? What was the best event?
Yeah. What was like your most memorable event that you were a part of? That was the question.
I will come up with a top 3 for you.
Perfect. Folks, we will see you next week. This has been a blast. Thank you all for tuning in. And we will see you guys next Tuesday night, 7 o'clock.
You tell them not to say nothing.
Yeah.